Okay, I've been suggested several ways to do this, and so we're just gonna punt this way because everybody's calendar is not here. So I need to check if Mr. Grindstaff is here and I've missed him. Okay. Mr. West, would you come up and let me ask you a few questions, please? We'll play like you're on the Wendy Williams show or something.
I get to go first?
Yeah, your challenger's not here. Okay, let me grab this. Hold on, I'll be right back.
Sing us a song, Jay.
Come thou fount of every blessing. How's that?
I have several that a lot of these things are yes and no that we want.
I don't do yes and no, but if that's what you want.
Shut up, you're gonna do yes or no? Is this a little one? Okay. I've been understanding that there is some information going on, and we'll give you about a minute and a half to 2 minutes to tell about this. Do we have an illegal budget in South Carolina?
That's an interesting question, but the answer to that is there was an opinion issued in 1963 by the Attorney General. And that opinion says that the bicameral body, or the bicameral institution of the Senate and the House, should remain as separate institutions. All right, they don't want colluding going on the front end of the budget process or at the end. And if they did do that, and I understand that's been out there, and that's my problem with this entire election process. It's my first time for re-election, but there is an enormous amount of disinformation and misinformation out there that needs to be clarified. In the Republican Party, it is my particular opinion, and I'm pleading with you. When we get to a general election, we've already cannibalized each other. Okay? We need to unite as a party again. We need to come together on the founding principles, understanding that we may have some differences, but we do not need to cannibalize each other again. The simple answer to your question is the budget process is not illegal. There are Attorney General opinions as far back as 1963, and it goes back to Article 3, Section 15 of the Constitution.
Okay.
Which takes precedent over current law.
We know that you've been working on the opioid crisis. What is your number one issue that you want to tackle if you get back for the next 2 years?
My number one issue that I want to tackle in the next 2 years in South Carolina would be that we begin to move forward with efficiency in government. That's probably one of the things that bothers me the most. We're all held accountable as elected officials to make sure that we're efficient in state government. But if the truth was known, and there's a lot of people who want to put more and more under the governor, but the governor appoints the agency heads. The agency heads bring the budget to the subcommittees of the Ways and Means Committee or the Senate Finance Committee. We have got to get more control over the agency heads, putting the right people in the right place so that we can be more efficient all the way through the agencies. Assuming that the General Assembly is going to vote on a budget this big, line item by line item, or go through it line item by line item, voting on it section by section, but there's no way you're going to catch any malfeasance or misfeasance when you're voting in there. It starts with the agency heads, and we need to be clear about these things.
Do you believe in drug testing for welfare?
I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I don't want to be using tax dollars to support drug habits. I don't think that's a good thing to do. On the contrary to that, I think, not contrary to that, but in addition to that, I think we have some issues in this state, just like the opioid epidemic. I went to a mental health meeting, a Tri-County mental health meeting, and one of the board members said to me, you know, the opioid issue is a street issue. Those are just street people out there. No, it's not. I can count attorneys, business owners, people all throughout this state that have been hooked on opioids. It's not just an issue like a street drug. It's pervasive and it's deadly. So, you know, that's something that we really have to look at. And the mental health side of that is another side of that. When you go to school shootings, We want to address the gun issue and protect our children, which I'm all for. But I tell you this, the one piece we're missing in this whole puzzle, every single mass shooting in a school has had a mental health component that I'm aware of. And if we don't address the root of the problem rather than just the symptom, we're going to find ourselves in this over and over again.
Okay. This is a quick question. Your beliefs. When does life begin? Conception, a heartbeat, a number of weeks at birth, or other? When does life begin?
I mean, to me, that's something we shouldn't even have to ask. Life begins when the Lord wants life to begin, and that's at conception.
Okay. Have you endorsed any other candidate in any race?
No. But if you'd like for me to, I will.
That's up to you. Should we support Planned Parenthood?
That's one that really fascinates me, Cheryl. I was absolutely fascinated to hear legislators saying that we support them with $30 million a year. You know how much South Carolina has spent on Planned Parenthood? $13,000. But Greg Delaney, who is one of my heroes, I've known Greg 25 years, who was chairman of the Judiciary. He has carried the torch and the flag for pro-life since he has been in the South Carolina House. I mean, he has done it forever and ever and found a way and maintained a way to protect the Medicaid dollars for those seniors and others that are special needs that actually need it, not giving it up, but reducing those amounts of money all the way down to $13,000. So no, I don't want to support them at all. I want it to be zero. But I do realize that we do have to be careful in that process.
Okay, let's ask, what is the first step in the reconstruction of our SCDOT in your opinion?
This one gets 5 minutes. Yeah, and I'm serious, guys. And I'm gonna lay it out there for you. There's a lot of mis and disinformation out there. And I take that personal. And I'm going to tell you why I take it personal. Because I did my homework. I went back and read the laws. I read the budgets. I went to the audit reports. I read the audit reports. I know everything that's going on. And when people are telling you right now that your money from the new tax increase on the gas is going to the SIB, that is a lie. It's a lie. Period. Bottom line. Yes, ma'am. Where they're saying that the money right now, that all the new money is going to the state infrastructure bank, that is an absolute lie. There is a transportation infrastructure trust fund that has been set up by the legislature in the bill. All new monies go into that trust fund, and they can only be used for repairs and maintenance of roads. Josiah, if you need me to give you a quote after, I'll be glad to do it. If you can't write that fast. But I'll tell you this. The other side of this is the reforms were put into place as well. And that's what people don't understand. We were told we don't want it without reforming SCDOT. We reformed SCDOT. There is a priority list right now that exists that SCDOT has to follow to fund repairs and maintenance of roads and bridges. It's listed on the website of SCDOT. There is an interactive map on the website of SCDOT. You can pull down every road and see what the schedule is for that particular road. You tell me how you're going to collude and commit fraud with that kind of public information. Well, that wasn't enough for us. So we decided we want to make sure if that money's going into a trust fund that DOT is spending, we want to make sure there's some accountability. So you know what we did? We added auditors to SCDOT. But they don't report to SCDOT. You know who they report to?
No.
The Inspector General. Straight to the Inspector General. Now you tell me that we didn't reform SCDOT. Now you tell me that that money can go to the state infrastructure bank. It's a lie. And I'm going to tell you, as a Christian, and I take this very personal, and I don't mean to get emotional about it, but my faith means something deep to me. And I don't sell out my faith in Jesus Christ for anybody or anything. And I'm certainly not going to do it for politics. And I'm certainly not going to do it to stay in an elected office.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a few more issues if you want.
We'll have, you can stay after too, and they'll stay as long as you want
I got to
to.
walk for a little bit.
Is Mr. Phillips here? I did not see him come in. So we have the same issue here, is the opponent is not here. We're going to ask Craig Gagnon, am I saying that right?
Yes.
And I'll do the same thing, ask him some open questions. And afterwards, we'll have some extra questions that I did not get from the floor. You'll be able to ask some questions to specific people. Okay. I'm trying to find one.
Give me an easy one.
He just does yes or no.
Yeah, yes, I'll nod.
Do you feel in South Carolina we should expand Medicaid?
No, absolutely not. Medicaid expansion costs a lot of money. One of the arguments that was used for the folks that were pushing for Medicaid expansion was that, oh, it's free. We've already paid for it. The problem is, no, it's not free. Someone has to pay for it, and it has not already been paid for, but it is something that we're going to continue to pay for if we expand Medicaid. So after a certain number of years, and we looked at all the numbers, after so many years, the federal government did say they would fund it for a while. But then after a while, they start pulling back their funding, and then the state's liability continues to increase and increase, and there's no way we could cover the expense. When you're talking, billions of dollars every year to expand Medicaid in South Carolina, it just doesn't make sense. We can't afford it at the federal level. What makes you think we can afford it to expand the system? A government-run healthcare industry debacle, or health insurance industry debacle. It doesn't run effectively and efficiently on the federal level. It's not going to run effectively and efficiently on the state level.
So I asked you a question that I asked Mr. West. Do you believe in drug testing for welfare?
Yes, I think that would be a great idea. The only downside I see is the cost. It is very expensive to do these drug tests. They do take time. Also, the amount of time we would spend in the courts, because we're infringing on the rights of the people that are on unemployment or whatever, or welfare. We're infringing on their rights. It just would open up a can of worms. But I think it would be a great idea myself.
We know this is a national issue, but we're told that there's natural gas off our coastline in South Carolina. Do you feel that we should explore to see if there is natural gas on our coast?
Not only explore, but I say dig, baby, dig. Dig, baby, dig. Get that stuff up. If we have resources off the coast of South Carolina, one of the arguments, I'm for exploration of the coast off South Carolina. The folks at the coast, that live at the coast, think it's going to be a debacle. But the way I look at it is this. They're saying that because we give them the right to explore off our coast, we're also giving them drilling rights. Well, that's not true. You give someone the right to explore off our coast doesn't automatically give them the power to go out and set up a derrick and start drilling indiscriminately off our coast. We have to make sure if we do some drilling off the coast of South Carolina, we've got to be sure that we follow the law. And the laws are set up to protect the environment, to protect the people. And the last thing that a energy company wants to do is pollute the atmosphere or the coast. You see what happened with the Deepwater Horizon BP thing out in the Gulf. You think they wanted to spend an extra, $25 billion or $30 billion of their money in lawsuits and reparations? No, they don't want to do that. They're not going to purposely do these things. Somehow I think you get these people that think that they don't care if they do that. Believe me, these businesses do care that there's a potential for that. there's always a potential for mistakes or anything like that. Heck, a ship coming off the coast of South Carolina that contains oil could break up and cause an oil slick. You know. But yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. We need to make sure that we have those, if we have those assets off our coast, make sure they're there. We might not have to drill for them now, but at some point in the future, we may have to go out there and get it. So I'm not opposed to it at all.
Have you endorsed any other candidate in any other race?
No. After the primary, I'm sure I'll be doing a lot of that. But
What's the number one issue that you want to tackle in the next 2 years?
I think the number one issue, and Jay kind of hit on it as well, Representative West, and about efficiency in government. We want to make sure that things are open, more efficient. When I first got elected in 2012, the state of South Carolina, they had this index of transparency index put off by this group. South Carolina got an F. As a matter of fact, I think it might have been an F- in the way that the state government was transparent. I think the latest one, we've improved. We haven't improved a bunch, but I think we're up in the C+ category, I think. And so we're doing a lot better. I've seen some things come through, especially with the SCDOT, under the direction of Secretary Christy Hall, whose family are my constituents down in Abbeville County. She's from Abbeville County, and I think she's doing a great job down there. I think the accountability she's brought in, the changes that have taken place, I think that has gone a long way to help the transparency issue here in South Carolina. So that's probably one of the first things to do.
Okay, just a couple more. Do you feel the sentence for senior Richard Quinn and his son were hard enough?
No, I don't think so. What they did was very serious. It was a breach of trust, not just to their own people, but to the state of South Carolina, to their party, and I think it was they got off pretty easily. I thought.
Okay, one more, because this may take you a little while, and no one has seen these questions I have here, not even my husband, because he just got home, so. Constitutional carry versus concealed carry.
Well, and that's a good question. The constitutional carry, it depends on, there's different versions of it, let's say. Concealed carry, I love it. I think it's a great idea. I think the folks that get a concealed carry permit, they go through classes, they go through background checks through SLED. They make sure that they are competent and able and to carry a firearm and carry a hidden firearm. And I think that's a great idea. Constitutional carry, it involves a lot of different things. They have different meanings of it, and it depends on which one that we talk about. You can have a constitutional carry where, in a certain respect, it's almost like a registered constitutional carry. You don't want just everyone out there carrying a gun that just wants to pick up a gun and carry it. If he's not mentally, if he's a threat to people, you don't want him going out and strapping on a gun and going out and carrying guns around. Of course, they could do that if they wanted to. It always happens. So I do think there needs to be some safeguards to make sure that people go through background checks, make sure they don't have any severe, dangerous mental health issue or any other issue that they would pose a threat to the public like that. So that's my kind of take on it. But I looking at these things, it's not really clear as to exactly saying, well, everyone should strap up and go, get a gun on and walk up and down the road. But I do think there are some questions that I want to have answered as well before we dive into it. But like I say, the constitutional carry, it's a constitutional right if that's the way they look at it, and everyone is entitled to carry a gun according to the Second Amendment. But who are those people? And do you want to have any control over who the people are that can carry one? I think it's a fair question.
Do you know of any one thing that you'd like to pull out that's a misconception that's being told by your opponent? Is there any one thing that they've said about you that you think is a bold-faced lie that you want to set straight, or the one most important thing?
Well, I think what's interesting is a lot of times when folks, and truthfully, I was guilty of it myself. when you first run for office, you think you have an idea exactly how things are supposed to go. In your mind, you have it all set. You're running for office, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna work for this, this is how the system, this is how I can get things done, this is how the system works. When you get to Columbia, you really find out, ooh, it's a lot more complicated than you think it is. And it's not all cut and dry. Sometimes you'll support a bill that you don't particularly like 100%. It might be 80% or 90%, but there are portions of it that we cannot possibly do without. And I think that's where I have to make those decisions to say, okay, I'm going to vote for this bill. I don't like all the aspects of it. There were some things, for instance, in last year's gas tax bill. I didn't like the idea. Here we're giving incentives to people, tax credits in the federal level for people to buy electric cars, and then we immediately go about taxing them in that gas bill last year, extra money because you have an electric car. I was like, what are we trying to? What are we doing? We're giving you a credit here and we're taking it back over here. That was the craziest thing. However, the bill itself, I think, required me to look at it and say, we need to have this tax more than the negative aspects of it. And so I think, to me, I supported it because we had to get that money. These roads are deteriorating, and that fund will go into and has been going into a maintenance trust fund. And it's not going to the State Infrastructure Bank. It's not going to build new roads. It's not going for matching funds or anything like that to build new roads. That's where it's going, and that's part of the misconception I think people have sometimes. For me, you can't always get what you want, but you try to get the best you can. A half a loaf is better than no loaf at all, and so that's what you try to do, and you try to compromise. You try to think. If it goes too far, I can't say exactly where a bill would go too far with that, except to say I know when it would go too far, and I can't accept that, and so we're going to have to start over, or I'm just not going to support it. So that's the thing. You can't be rock hard, and you have to pick your battles. You got to choose your battles. If you want something positive done at the State House, you got 62 other colleagues that you have to convince to vote for your idea or your bill, and then you got to go to the Senate and get more than half of them. You got to get 25 of them to vote for you. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot. You got to pick your battles, choose your battles wisely, and make the best judgment call you can. That's all I can say. But that's the thing that gripes me is they think, oh, you're messing up because you're not voting for this and voting for that. Sometimes it's not as easy as it seems. And when you look at a voting record, sometimes it doesn't tell the complete story. There's a lot of backstories that go on too. It's kind of fun when they happen, but also can be misleading to the public and can be used by somebody, an opponent, to make it look like you're doing something you're not really doing. So that's my biggest gripe. But
Thank
that's
you.
it. Okay,
We
thank you.
appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you so much. I have seen where they pull out one vote and say, this guy voted for such and such, and then it's like, yeah, but, you can't just pull out one vote and chastise somebody. Mr. Hill, I do not see your opponent, but I have special questions for you.
Okay.
If you could come up, Jonathan Hill. I'm looking on this side this time, Jonathan. I've seen some really interesting things come out about you.
You don't say.
I don't, sir. So now, Mr. Hill, are you supporting the legalization of marijuana?
The only thing that I support legalizing is medicine. I do not support legalizing drugs, okay? So that's a distinction that needs to be made. And it's kind of funny to me because, just a week or two ago on the Rick Driver show, my opponent took the same position that I've held for years now on medical cannabis. And I tell you, I have heard from so many constituents in Anderson and in Townville where I live whose lives have been affected by cancer, whose lives are affected by chronic pain, and so many other things, autoimmune issues that probably be helped by this. So we're listening to law enforcement's concerns and want to be very careful in how we go about this, precisely because we don't want to allow recreational marijuana. If we did, that would be a much easier bill to draft, honestly.
I'm not asking you some of the normal questions because you have been with us before and we kind of know you, Jonathan. So, Jonathan, where do you live?
I live in Townville, South Carolina.
Not in Georgia.
Not in Georgia, no.
Would you like to dispel that rumor?
I would, and if anyone doesn't believe me, you're welcome to step right outside. There's a car with a Hill for State House bumper sticker on it, and it's got a South Carolina tag on it. The truth is, if you had looked about a month ago, you would have seen the Georgia tag. That was just because I had just bought it from a guy in Georgia, and hadn't completed the process of getting the title and registration transferred over and paying the extra fee. Where's Mr. Gagnon? It's a hybrid car, and so I get the special treatment from the state now as well. So, but that's the reality. I've lived in South Carolina. I was born in Anderson. I grew up in upstate South Carolina. I grew up in Donalds, which is not too far from where Craig, I think you represent that area currently. My dad was pastor there for 10 to 12 years. We moved to Townville and have been there for the last 10 years. I have a lot of deep family roots out there, and this is home. I've been blessed to work for companies from home, from all over the country, as far away as Silicon Valley. So this is home. This is a very special place to me.
And you are a product of homeschooling, correct?
I am, yes. I was homeschooled.
So are you for or against sanctuary cities?
I am absolutely against sanctuary cities, and I'm glad that we don't have any sanctuary cities right now. I'll tell you what else I'm against. I'm against politicians inventing issues that don't exist. I'm against creating paperwork for cities and counties unnecessarily for problems that don't exist. I'm against punishing the taxpayers instead of the politicians and bureaucrats who might be responsible for starting the sanctuary city or establishing the sanctuary city status. So the bill that was introduced punished the wrong people, and I made the tongue-in-cheek move of introducing an amendment to rename that bill to the Henry McMaster Re-election Act of 2018. We had a lot of fun with that.
We have to have a sense of humor, don't we? Did you vote against pay raises for teachers?
No, I voted for pay raises for teachers in this year's budget.
Do you believe that President Trump is a Nazi?
No, absolutely not. Of course not. And I don't think of any person that supported Donald Trump in those terms. I've been asked about this, and certainly my opponent has sought to play up on a idiot social media post that I posted for about 3 hours, several years ago during the presidential primaries. I learned my lesson, okay? And I haven't made that mistake again. But the honest truth is, I was trying to say one thing, what everyone else took away from it, what everyone else saw and read was something completely different, which I did not intend. And I should have anticipated that. It was my mistake that I didn't. In the process, I heard a lot of people that I call my friends. Some of them are here in this room tonight. And it really, really, I was really disappointed with myself, to be honest, that I made that mistake. So I do try to own up to them when that happens. I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes from time to time. And I do try to learn from them so that, things like that don't happen again.
I hate to ask some of these questions, but it's nice to have, I wanted to give you a chance.
Yeah, I appreciate
to clear these up.
that, because these are questions that are going to be on some people's minds, and I appreciate the opportunity to respond.
Do you believe that we should, we'll go back to the drilling, not drilling, but exploration. Do you think we need to explore, since you're driving a hybrid, you're worried about alternative?
Yes, so when I first bought a Toyota Prius, it was when gas prices were up near $4 a gallon, and I joked with people and told them I was just too cheap to pay for gas, so I'd rather have a car that used less. And I meant to, and never did actually go about doing this, but I was going to get a great big block letter drill Anwar sticker and put it across the back of my car. just to blow people's minds. But in all reality, natural gas is very cheap right now. A lot of power plants are moving from coal to natural gas for that very reason. It is cleaner, it does pollute less. That's a good thing. Less pollute. I mean, I want clean air to breathe. Who doesn't? I want clean water to drink. Who doesn't? All right. And we do have a constitutional responsibility to take care of the natural resources that we have in the state. So, on the specific issue of offshore drilling, honestly, I was neutral about it. You know, I was very actually intrigued by the idea that maybe there was offshore natural gas that we could drill for. But, you know, after becoming a little more educated on what that would involve, number one, when you drill for gas, you're also drilling for oil because usually they're in the same vicinity. So if you can't find one without the other, usually you're going to find both together. That's one consideration. But the real clincher for me that raises a concern for me, and if we do it, we would have to address this some way, I believe. And that is the Post and Courier ran an article a month or two ago documenting the fact that off of South Carolina's coast, there are many, many weapons that have been dumped there. Bombs, chemical weapons, things, relics of the Cold War and World War II. And so before we start, and occasionally those things have been known to wash up on the beach and they have to call a bomb squad out, take it away before somebody gets hurt. So that was pretty disturbing to me. If we could do it and do it safely, I don't see why not. I am all for energy independence in the United States. We need to do that. I'm glad that President Trump has opened that up even more to explore some of what we have, some of our resources in Alaska.
So, have you endorsed any other candidate in any other race?
This year I have not really publicly. I will say that the one race that I have been the most outspoken about, and I've actually offered to endorse, is Representative Joshua Putnam's in his race for Secretary of State. I have served with Putnam for the last 4 years in the State House and have been impressed with how hard of a worker he is. And this is one race where it's really kind of a no-brainer. I mean, he is far and away the best candidate for the job. He is far and away the guy that has the best ideas for what to do with the job, with the office. And unfortunately, the incumbent has not been doing his job. So it is time for change then.
On a scale of 1 to 10, what type of job do you think our president has done?
Well, I think it's a little unfair of a question in one sense because he hasn't completed his term and we don't know what good things may be yet around the corner. But I can tell you I've been super impressed with ending the Korean War. My grandfather fought in that war and I believe probably had severe PTSD from it because he had some drinking issues and whatnot. And you know, we had a troop stationed there for a long time, so it's been, you know, really kind of special to me to see that end after all these years. I am just thrilled to have Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. I think that was a factor in today's ruling. I think it would have gone a different way had Hillary become president. So I'm very glad that Donald Trump is our president, and I am very glad that so far I have been wrong about some of my early concerns about him.
Are there any other misconceptions going around about you that you would like to clear up? What's the one that I might have missed that you'd like to clear up?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's been kind of implied in some roundabout ways that some of the things that I have worked on the last few years, run on, maybe are not true or not well researched enough. And I can tell you that I do my homework as well. I work very hard at it. I take the job very seriously. And colleagues that serve with me, that I serve with here in Anderson County, can attest to the fact that I do read the bills. I don't always vote the way everyone else does, but usually I have good reasons for it and can explain what those are. And I do sweat the details. Part of that probably comes from my background as a software developer, where one letter or one number or one symbol in the wrong place can break everything. And so when I'm reading the bills, it's almost like reading software to me, because I have a very great attention to detail and have been able to work with staff and caught numerous issues that the paid House staff attorneys that are in charge of drafting these things missed. Mistakes that we're all human, but you know, we've been able to work together on fixing some of those things. So I can tell you that I'm not going to make a claim about anything or anybody unless I can defend it and document it.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
All right,
Thanks for
thank
your service. Okay, so we come to our final two. And I'm going to stand between and hopefully. If I could have Rick Fremantle and Representative White. Sir?
We're gonna pass them on.
Yeah, or, yeah, let me do that. Let me give you that and I'll use this one. Okay? Was that you go first? Okay, what is the number one issue? First, we're going to ask Mr. White, and then we'll give Mr. Fremantle time to come back. What is the first issue that you'll be working on if reelected in the next 2 years? What's your main thing you'll be working on?
Well, one's the budget, but obviously something I've been working on for the last several years and trying to do is something we have a big problem with, and that is the formula funding. In this state, we've got a lot of different formulas out there that are outdated, and we're trying to fix those. One of those is the EFA, the EIA, in education, make it more of a block grant type funding program. I've been working with all the different school districts across the state to do that. The other is the local government fund, which is also a formula-driven mechanism that we have been working on. We filed a bill in 2015, now in the Senate, to try to revamp the formula. You ask any county or those out there, we've asked them repeatedly to give us the mandates. They're all different. Nobody's on the same sheet. Nobody can tell us what the mandates are. So it's time to go in and just revamp that. Some of it we'll just take back over. With new modern technology and those types of things, we'll take that back over. So those are the things I want to work on when I get back and continue to do that. While being chairman of Ways and Means, I made the most transparent committee in the whole General Assembly. We were the first to broadcast all meetings live. So any of y'all can go on there and look. It's a live broadcast. It's in our rules. It's the only committee within the rules of the House that when you are convened has to be streamed live. The only one. We went in and put in technology this year. Jonathan would like it because it's all paperless. Went to that part. So everybody's got a tablet, and all amendments and everything is put live to the general public at the same time the member gets it. The only committee that does that. And that was done underneath my leadership. I've taken from Jonathan, I think you were in as a freshman, and I know Jay, poor man, God bless you, you had Dan. He didn't teach y'all how to read the budget and the budget process and everything. So I bring every freshman class in and I basically teach them the budget process because I want them to know how things work, what to do. So I've been probably the most transparent chairman that's ever been there. I'll continue to do that and work through these formulas and get these things out of there so you really get more of a truth in budgeting what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fremantle, what will be the number one issue you'd like to take up?
Thank you for the question. For me personally, the most valuable resource that we have in this state are our children. That's the first thing that needs to be taken care of when our legislature gets back in session. I like the idea of bringing efficiency into government. There was an amendment made during the last budget process to take $5 million out of the Parks, Recreation, and Tourism budget to fund 75 resource officers. I thought that was a great idea considering that budget was over $100 million. 75 resource officers. They were going to go to those schools in our state who couldn't afford their own resource officers. I think that's a great place to put them. I understand Anderson County, Chad McBride, and some of the county reps have been working together, and so it looks like our schools here in Anderson County are going to be very well taken care of. Unfortunately, we have a huge void across the whole state. This issue needs to be taken seriously. We need to look at every agency in our state government. We need to find out if there's any fraud, any waste. I've never spent a day there, but I could assure you there's probably a lot of money being wasted there that we could grab a hold of and take that money and use it to fund resource officers in our school. We take care of that issue, then we can address some of these other things. But for me personally, as someone who has earned an education degree to teach science, I know what the teachers in the classrooms think about their students. I know how they feel about them, and I know they're as scared as those students are. And the idea of sheltering in place is nothing more than a sitting duck. We need to do more to protect our kids and our teachers and our schools. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and give you this one to start. How do you feel about the unfunded resources from the state to Anderson? Unfunded.
Local government funding?
One of the things that scares me the most, Mr. Gagnon, is that high learning curve. Is Tom still here? He's mentioned it many times. And I understand that if I do go to Columbia, I'm in for a very big education. I'm good with that. From my perspective, as a citizen out here running for this office, my understanding is that when Act 388 came into law, there was 1 penny added to the sales tax. That 1 penny was supposed to go to Columbia, and the reason it was 1 penny added to sales tax was prior to that, homeowners and property owners carried the burden of supporting their local governments. That 1 penny was supposed to alleviate that. The money was going to go to Columbia. Some grandiose formula would dictate how much was going to come back to the counties. Now, when the counties, take Anderson County for example, when they sit down this year and they start to work on their budget, they already, using the formulas that are in the statutes, have an idea how much they're supposed to get back here in Anderson County. Excuse me. It's not like the people in Anderson County haven't already paid the money in to have. The problem is, it seems to be a little greed factor in Columbia. They don't want to ship it back to us. To date, since 2009, Anderson County alone has been shorted over $21 million. Now, I know from asking you a few questions, that $21 million could have went to fund a resource officer down at Townville Elementary. Maybe a little Jacob Hall would still be here today if we had received our money back from Columbia. Now, I say, as long as that statute's in place, follow the law and send back the money to this county that we're supposed to get and send it to all the rest of the counties in the state too. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wright, I'll give you a chance. I know there's a proviso that keeps coming up, but I know this has always been a contentious thing. You got it.
I got it. And first and foremost, in the resource officers, that would be put in with the educational fund and revamping the formula. And that $5 million that they took actually was to fund in the advertising. The PRT does their advertising budgets 3 years in advance. So that money was already paying for contracts that would have been out there that would have broken contracts, and you had some issues on your problem with whenever you start breaking contracts with advertising. You just can't fund advertising and do that. That's your number one industry that brings in stuff in agriculture the same. But when you get to the local government fund, yes, there is a proviso in the budget that suspends the local government fund, because the law also says if you don't fund the local government fund, you have to, by separate legislation, say you're not going to do it. So that is what we do. There's also a proviso in there that says that if you do not fund the local government fund to the formula that it's supposed to be funded by, whatever amount you short the local government fund, then the counties don't have to fund those services. They're in there. So they got the flexibility. And as far as Act 388 goes with that penny, it goes to school operations on your house. It doesn't go to county government operations. It goes to school operations. And it takes off that portion in 2007 when it was frozen on your home, your owner-occupied property, is what that pays for. You might also want to know, while doing your research, that that money, that penny, has never, except for one time early in its stage, ever made enough money to do that. So we have to appropriate money out of the general fund revenue to make up for that shortfall of that penny to send back to the schools for the owner-occupied part of their properties. There are many funds that you want to go into the local government fund. There's lots of them. The homestead exemption, which is what it is in Act 388. penny. There is a line in there that we appropriate the shortfall, because we said in 2007 we would hold the school districts harmless. We have to do, the penny hasn't come in to do that part. There's also in there underneath the aid to subdivision within the state treasurer's office that basically gives supplements to the county treasurer, auditor, coroner I think's got a little bit in there, sheriff's got some in there. There's also monies that comes back through the local government fund whenever we set this thing up eons ago, which is why it's got to change, for libraries. We have plenty of libraries now. And I've been in this building listening to Joey Preston went around and built library after library after library. Well, the state, through the local government fund, has to fund those libraries. When it was originally done, there were only a few branches to do it. Now, we have other lines within that budget for aid to libraries. Jonathan, we have meetings with the libraries every year. You can contest to that, and Jay and Ann, we all met with them. Faith line comes down. It's also in the lottery. We fund libraries through the lottery. So Tom Allen, when you have to sit and do the budget, they fund the libraries. Well, the state's not only doing it through a local government fund, they said we're short, it's in another line coming through in other areas, and that line goes. There's also aid to local fire districts that we do every year. It is an open account, and it falls about $3 million short now. So when we close the books at the end of the year, we have to use our reserve funds to backfill that account. So that's one reason you've fallen 15 million short every year. We close the budget the last several years, is those open-ended accounts, much like the lottery is also.
Representative White, where do you find is the biggest misuse of funds in Columbia?
The Senate.
I don't know if it's the Senate. We respect each other's budgets on that part, the House and the Senate. That's kind of what we do there. I think beauty's in the eye of the beholder, just like waste is in the eye of the beholder. I mean, clearly Mr. Freeman thinks that advertising through PRT and fulfilling our obligations and contractual agreements is a waste. And that money should be given to the State Department of Education. But through our budgeting process, which starts in August, when you said get back, that's when the budget process starts. Every agency has to start in August, making their request for what they want or may need next year. And some of that may be funding legislative things that we did. Like last year, it was millions of dollars through the Real ID Act that we had to go fill in to that point. So people say the surplus, you're doing all this spending. Well, committees are passing bills, federal mandates are coming down, we have to fund these things. So within that waste factor, we've got a lot of different things that Representative West spoke to about fraud. We've got the Inspector General, you can report fraud and anything you want to. We have some great whistleblower laws. That's one thing that's bothered me about the DOT side of things. Everybody's saying, oh, there's fraud, 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 fraud. We got a great whistleblower law. Turn them in. You might make some money.
That's right.
Because you get part of the reward. If they're wasting money, turn them in. You might, Ed McMahon might show up on your door. You might get some. But I mean, I think at that part, we do a budget process that we go through and we ask each and everybody. We also now have an oversight committee that's in there doing other programmatic things. And we drill down pretty tight on what we do in that part. I would say if you want to find some waste, there's probably some within the Department of Education. Last year, they were sitting on $100 million in the EIA funds. We took that money and put it back into brick and mortar in the corridor of shame to help them do things that they needed to do. By the time we got through, they said, oh, it was spent. And we're like, no, it's not. It's sitting in your account. You've got $100 million sitting there. And all said and done, they justified, I think, somewhere around 65 million or so that they had spent. So we took the rest of it, put it into buildings, which you'll know the EIA, when it was originally set up, a portion of the EIA was supposed to go to school buildings. And we did that. So the State Department of Education did not ask for any resource officers this year in their budget, or last year in that part. The governor put some in. What was in on the floor didn't have a plan. There was no plan. So we came about and figured out a way to do it. I don't believe in just throwing money at an issue without a plan, a well thought out, well executed plan.
Okay, thank you. Same thing, Mr. Freemantle. What do you think is the biggest misuse of funds in Columbia?
Well, again, as an outsider looking in, we have the Department of Transportation Committee, we have PERC, we have several committees, as I understand it, that were responsible for overseeing Santee Cooper the VC Summer project. And now we have the FBI coming in to do some oversight. Because it appears that the committees, and I'm not sure if these people are paid or not, or if it's just a position where they sit there. So if they're not paid, well then maybe we should have hired somebody to do a better job, because obviously a lot of money has been wasted because these committees didn't do their job. And a lot of people in the state are going to suffer because of it. Again, not being in there, not having the knowledge that these gentlemen have that are currently representatives, I'm kind of at a little bit of a default position. But as an outsider looking in, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. We're talking about billions of dollars when it comes to Santee Cooper and VC Summer. Obviously, something needs to be done to straighten those kinds of problems out in the future.
Okay, I want to open it up now to y'all and see what questions you have from the audience for these two gentlemen, since both of them are here. And then we'll open up for questions of the other gentleman that came up before, but since we have the two here, I want to open it up. Mr. Nymark.
We've heard this evening from a few of you representatives, and you all claim how wonderful everything is in Columbia. Why is there so much negative press about the corruption and fraud and everything else that's going down in Columbia, and why does the budget keep increasing exponentially?
Do you want to address any of that, or do you want me to just give it to
I believe he's talking to the
That's-
elected officials.
That's fine.
Yeah. That's one of those things that I think that everybody loves the fraud and corruption. I saw, the system that is in place seems to be working. I think today you had a gentleman plead guilty. So, I think that part is working, and it always has worked. Those that have been doing things get caught, and they're punished. That is what we have. And everybody loves to pick on Columbia with it, but there's a lot going on in counties and cities and everywhere else. You have, sheriffs and council people all over the place getting there. So it's not just Columbia that you get in that point. It's also in DC. And I would, to that point, you say the revenues go up. All right, sure, the revenues go up. So the expenditures of the state go up. Everybody says, and I read all this, oh, you got 400 million surplus, and you got all this stuff. Well, a surplus is something left over. When you start writing a budget, all right, you have things that you have to fund. Insurance goes up every year. How many of the insurance goes up? We're a self-funded plan in the state of South Carolina. And we have to do different things, and we fund that. We have to fund employees out of that budget as well. And all that comes out of that new estimated revenue we have. So to say that, and pensions does too. So this year alone, just for the health insurance and the pension increase in this current fiscal year that's coming up July 1, was about $96 million. Two items. That's before we give a pay raise to a teacher. That's before we fix the leak corrections problem, because we got corrections officers making about $23,000 to $24,000 a year. We need to increase their salaries, which we have done. We need to increase teacher starter pay, which we did in this budget. That's coming out of all this stuff that people keep calling, it's a surplus. It's not a surplus. It's running things. You've got to do these things. You've got to give cost of living to some people, which we're not giving retirees cost of living. There's ones in there in the back. We'll tell you, the state employees are not getting a cost of living. And any business is you're only as good as your employees. But we don't have the money to do that. If we had surpluses, we would have fully funded the local government fund. We would have fully funded the EFA formula, which were $660 million shy in that one. We would have done all these different things, and then what was left over would be a surplus. Now, having said all that, we've also cut taxes during this whole part. We've eliminated groceries. It's in about $320 million a year is what that one little bit cost us. We have to make up the difference in the penny for Act 388. That's not coming in through what we said would come in. Because as crazy as it seems, even though it was a penny added, it's really not, it's not a total penny on on that part, so it's not like that when 1 cent comes in, it's a fraction of a penny when it gets to that point. Because when you layer it so high. So there are expenditures that we've got to have. Lottery expenditure with open accounts, like I said earlier, with the fire service. You know, that's one of the things that we have. Those things aren't bringing in enough revenue, but we will spend money doing opioids. Opioids we weren't funding last year. We funded opioids to the tune of about $20 million this year new, between building treatment facilities, the things we had to do that a study committee came out with. We didn't have that last year. We got it now. Autism. We doubling the rate of what autistic therapy is getting paid in this state. I don't call those things wasting money and then doing surpluses. That's that recurring revenue that we have, which was about 200, well, a little more than 297, but around 300 million that we had to spend to do those things. And 90-something went in just to state employees. That's not the school district's employees. That's just those on the state. That doesn't take Clemson University employees. They have to raise tuition to take care of theirs. So we don't fund that through the general fund. If we did, we'd need even more. But we cut about $3 billion on an annual basis out of the revenue stream and keep it back in the people's pockets in South Carolina.
Mr. Freemantle, what is the number one thing that you think that you can change or do differently than your opponent has done in Columbia?
Great question. You know, I made a little girl cry the other day over this subject. I apologize for that. No one was harder on himself than I was, but I get over it. When you stand there and you take an oath of office, and Mr. Gagnon, you seem to be confused about constitutional carry. When you put your hand on the Bible and you swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, there was a time in this country when those words meant something. It's a solemn oath. There should be no debate about constitutional carry. It's a God-given right. It's clear, cut, dry. The only people that make it an issue or a problem are folks who don't want to face up to that. I often wonder if the Founding Fathers were in this country today, what they would think of politicians who take that oath and then just blasé throw it away, pretend it don't even exist. We could start with truth and honor in our government. That's where we can make a huge dent in what's wrong with our country today.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Well, first I'd like to say that I've appreciated everybody's participation here, and I don't know about all you folks, but I think I've learned a lot by just listening to these people. But there's a couple of things that I wonder about. One is in our education. In education, Anderson County has 5 school districts, 5 school boards, and if you're going to talk about efficiency in government, let's require school, if you got 1 district or 5 districts or 3 districts, there's got to be some control of schools. Schools are eating up in this county, and I'm sure it's true statewide, there's at least 70% of the county money raised within the county that goes into schools. You'll never satisfy their want for money. So how are we controlling those schools? The other thing, we talk about looking exploration in the shore. Would anybody care to guess how many acres of ground in Anwar are used for drilling? There's less than 50. I think it's less than 30 acres, and all the drilling in Anwar is done from those 30 acres or whatever, because we can do lateral drilling. You can go out for miles. It's called fracking, folks. So that there are some things that can be done. There's no reason we shouldn't be exploring for gas and oil off of the coast of South Carolina, because if the drilling is on land, and the state ought to be thinking now about setting aside the land that we can drill from. Because if you got something polluting a beach, you can go clean that up. You don't have to send a ship out to do it. But I really would like to see you do something about education. Because the money's not going into the classroom.
Well, I mean, it's, and Mr. Martin, that's part of the plan, is taking a point, looking at what we do. It's over a $10 billion expenditure in the state of South Carolina now. And to that point, is we got to look at things like Tennessee. Tennessee funds X amount of administration per pupil, and that's all they do. The locals, if they want to go higher, they can do that. Those are the things that we were looking at, trying to get going. A lot of what I have to fight and do is the State Department of Education.
Sure.
To that point, and I've met with folks. Do you realize that school buses don't have a standard throughout the bus shops? Mechanics don't have to be certified. The school bus shop does not have to be certified. Nothing in that part. Trying to change that. Put a proviso in the budget this year to do it. We got it. We're fighting over the Senate part now. To me, that just makes perfectly good sense. That's what you should be doing. The State Department does not like this. Also, with the whole point of working with the ones in Anderson County, to the point of we got to get into the modern era. Also, a proviso I put in the budget this year was, I don't know about y'all, nothing against you, Kyle, but I hate half school days. I think they're the worst.
It's a waste.
And we've got 3 coming up, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, this week. And it's hard on a parent that works to have children in the schools and get to that point. But looking at different things, the school makeup days, add an hour to a day. So therefore, after 5 days, you pretty much made up that. You don't need that half day. Go online. Take a webinar. We're trying to pilot a program here in District 5 to do that now, to make up for these things. Use ETV with a direct channel for those areas that don't have Wi-Fi. But eventually we've got to get Wi-Fi across the cloud, just like North Carolina does, for their schools to be able to go in and do it in those poor areas. Those are the things I'm working on. Those are the things I want to continue to work on. That's why I said earlier, we'll go back and work on it.
Elizabeth is asking a question, but I did had a chance to meet with the superintendent, Molly Spearman, the other night, and I asked why our school buses did not have seat belts. And she was telling me how well built the school buses are, and that if the new school buses, the new ones that they've just bought, and that if the children are buckled in, there's more of a chance that they would not be able to get the children out of the bus during an accident. Yeah, so actually not having the seat belts is
My
safer than
Lincoln's
having.
rather well built, why do I have to wear the thing?
I voted against mandatory seatbelts.
Okay, my issue is got kind of 3-pronged thing. The education, the increase in budgets, and what we spend it on. This is not quite related, but we have the new budget county council has been working on, but I haven't seen any budget meetings. But I have my book, and I was looking through it yesterday. Last year's budget for the county was $180 million and something. This coming year, $194 million. That's $14 million more in 1 year. Okay, instead of all the economic development and people going and buying cars, building new houses, all the taxes that comes in on that should be helping the county. Instead of that, what happens is we as citizens never get a tax relief. We only get fees added for our cars and so forth. Where I see, and I'm a retired teacher, 35 years, public, private, college, I'm just in awe and dismay of how we're spending this money. We're making these schools to be like Taj Mahals. We're building county buildings to be like banks that have unlimited amount of money.
Making them look like prison.
We're spending the money on all the wrong things.
That's local.
Also, where I see when you have an influx of money, what happens is government starts adding employees. I'm asking Ms. Rita Davis to give me a count from 2008, how many employees we had and the budget. How many employees and the budget for every single year, and I guarantee you, you're gonna find out that we have added a bunch of employees.
Yes.
And so, Brian, since you've been down there, my question is when a department issues their budget or their needs or whatever, my fear, I guess, is like in the DOT, that since they know more money's coming in, that they're going to either add more employees or give their engineers a $20,000 to $30,000 raise and so forth. How do you prevent that from happening?
Sure,
Yeah, go ahead.
make it easier, and I'll step over here on that part. First and foremost, any agency that wants to add employees, we have to authorize that for their FTEs in the budget process. Generally speaking, whenever there's legislation that is passed, no matter what it is, and I keep going back to the Real ID with the DMV, I mean, I think that thing wound up with a $60+ million price tag, and it had to have people to go out and start issuing real IDs. A lot of those were temporary in nature. We had to approve those. But when we pass in legislation, we have we know what the cost of that bill will be before you vote on it. Whether it's going to, and then once you pass it, then all of a sudden you got to fund it. So that's something that we just write the checks. Other committees are passing them, whether it's coming out of education, LCI, or coming out of judiciary, or these or ag or education. So I mean, those are things that we have to manage on that part. And then every year we go through and scrub FTEs. So we allow agencies to retain unused, unfilled FTEs, full-time equivalent employees. But if they get so many, we don't allow them to keep so many. So every year we go through and we audit that and we pull those back. So we have less FTEs now than we had the last 10 years ago. We spend less per South Carolina resident now as a state level than we did when I first went in. So I mean, it is going down on that part because we're at 5 million plus people. The Medicaid budget grew $1 billion since I've been there.
So we don't have the problem in Columbia, we've got it in Anderson.
Correct. I mean, we don't, and those school buildings, that's all done under your local school board. Your county council builds their buildings. We don't fund a lot of those things. That's done locally with the tax dollars. We spend back, and the EFA is primarily salaries of teachers, administration, custodial staff, and that part of stuff. That's what is in the EFA formulas, mostly those salaries.
Thank you. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I see at least 4 members of the House here, and my question is kind of something any of you could comment on. I've heard several remarks, and you're my representative. And I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot or anything, but we've heard several mention of employee retirement, just like Elizabeth. And I've been in a couple of meetings with Curtis Loftus, who is our state treasurer. And he's made the statement repeatedly that the retirement fund for employees has an unfunded liability of $24 billion or something. And there have been proposals to correct that by going from the defined benefit to the defined contribution type plan. And I was wondering if any of y'all wanted to just talk about that, and I've been told there's reasons not to change that for things like law enforcement, where they have a different need to have retention of people and so forth. But I haven't heard that brought up as an issue. People talked about everything else, but it is something out there that's a lot of all of our money, and I'm taking a position, I'm like Mr. Freeman, I'm not knowledgeable, but I'm concerned as a citizen. So if y'all wanted to mention that, I would appreciate it. And
Like my old Marine buddy, I learn a lot just listening to y'all. Thank you.
I could start here, and if you want to make a statement on it, Mr. Freeman, please feel free.
It's called passing the mic.
If you had any idea.
I haven't been educated yet.
We're not holding that against you, I apologize, we just have a lot of questions here.
I will speak to this from one aspect, and I'm sure that my colleagues who have been in the State House a lot longer than I have will answer other aspects that I can't speak to because I don't have the institutional knowledge on this specific thing. But one thing I do know is that law enforcement has their own retirement system. Okay, it is plagued with many of the same problems that the state retirement system is having. So, same issue, smaller scale. As far as the state retirement system is concerned, actually for the Forestry Commission, we learned earlier this year that it would actually be better for them to recruit and retain employees because of their on average, they turn over employees every 3 years or so. It would be better if they could take that money with them when they leave in the form of some sort of a 401k that they could roll it over, or when they come, they could roll their money into the retirement plan and that sort of thing. So, but the reality is, I'm with Senator Davis on this. Until we change and we stop adding new people to a defined benefit plan, and we move towards more of a 401k defined contribution model, let people invest their money in the private industry on their own. Probably going to get a better return that way anyway. That makes a lot more sense to me. I don't think you're going to fundamentally fix the problem until then. The thing that bothered me the most about the pension bill, which everybody in the legislature will acknowledge that was just a first step. Nobody by any means considers this a done issue. But the thing that bothered me about that was the billions of dollars that were going to be chipped in over the next 10 years into that failing system. And when I asked, well, how much of the deficit is this going to reduce, which I was being told it was in the near 60% deficit, it was going to move it down about 3 points. You know, that's not worth it to me. And when it comes at a price of affecting school districts a few years down the road, possibly driving up your property taxes, I can't support that.
Well, when you look at the pension system, in order to fix any problem you have, you got to figure out, one, what is the problem and how do we get here so we don't repeat ourselves. Yes, it was a pension system. We did have a financial problem. Last year we put $16 million into it, something like that, just to shore up the financial side of the spectrum. This year, and we're raising it 1 percentage point every year on anybody that's in it, and that's why I said earlier, it's money that we've got to appropriate. We've already passed this legislation, so we have to hope that at least the revenues grow enough to cover the state employees' pension system. If not, then we'll be reducing budgets throughout other people to put in there. That we have to do that part to shore it up for those liabilities. What you have is a 30-year system. Underneath Governor Sanford, he did start the optional retirement system under ORS. So you can go in and get your 401k. You don't have to go into the state system. There's a lot of people that want to go in, as Jonathan mentioned, but in the high-risk areas. So it's not, law enforcement does have PORS, the Police Officer Retirement System, which basically they want the disability benefit because they could get shot and hurt, whatever. That's huge for them. There's others at risk that are not just in the PORS law enforcement side of things. So you've got the prison guards, all those at some point, and you got some DOT folks, highway patrol, well, they're in the PORS. So that you have to have, and that what they want is basically the disability benefit that you can't get in the 401k. Either we have to now start paying them, because I said earlier, we tried to do that this year. You got basically prison guards making $23,000. I think we're getting them up to 28 and 32. We've been slowly rising it up. I think 32 is where we are trying to get to this year with them on that part. But you just can't hire these people. They used to be hired on a benefit. They would get the benefits of retirement. Well, now all of a sudden we're charging them more of their hard-earned money to go in there. But it's almost like, I tell people, it's like a mortgage. You got a 30-year liability, you got to pay it. That unfunded liability. You can't just switch to some other plan. If you switch to some other plan, now you're paying for two, not just one. So you got to get it to a point to where you paid this one down, you made the structural changes within it, which is what we're trying to do. I appointed an ad hoc committee to do it and look at it. We didn't get very far with it. Been working on this for years because it's tough. You have some of the state workers, all right, we're going to go from 28 to 30 years. Whew, maybe not. It's a pushback on that part. Well, then we got to change those things. So it's a little bit difficult making those sweeping changes on that part. Retirees want their cost of living, and then we reformed the thing. Basically, they can't get a cost of living to the rate of return so high. Because what was happening through the years prior was they were granting cost of living increases without funding the cost of living increase. The cost of living increase was funded through the basically like a line of credit. It was either funded out of the general fund or, ooh, that's only 2 years actuarially, and I got 10. So that leaves me 8 more years of actuarial soundness, I'm good to go. So that's what was kind of happening at that point. So then you were basically ran out of basically time and not enough money into it. So there are things out there that aren't getting conveyed. ORS is available. Obviously, he's on it. Some people want to go in and do it. Some we don't pay enough to be able to put on a 401k plan. They just can't afford it. So therefore, they want to stay in the old system. Some of the high-risk folks, we need to create another pool for. And I think you're going to see some hybrid plan come out before long. That's what we're working on to get there. But bottom line is, it's going to take money out of the general fund to pay down that debt on that, which we are currently doing. And that's part of that new revenue that comes in, those are decisions we make, we spend the money.
Thank you.
Yeah, just real quickly, I've only been there 2 years, but I ran pharmaceutical companies for a long time and hundreds of millions of dollars in budgets. No wound healing drugs. Believe me, I promise you, the reason I left is pharmaceutical companies are completely unethical. But one of my big concerns, the biggest concern I have is we have state employees, teachers. My wife has been teaching 28 years. All right? She went into teaching when she has her master's, national certification. She could have left at any time and gone to a university or private college and taught, but she stayed with our public schools and has won numerous awards, and she retired. When she went in, one of the reasons she went into public education was not because of the salary, I can promise you that, and Elizabeth knows that. It was because of the benefits and the things that she would receive after retirement. So I told you before, I call it like I see it, I'm a straight shooter. We give our word to these people, we need to do everything that we can to fulfill this. Now, we may have to get really creative, but I have a problem making promises like that and we don't keep them when people are banking on that for the rest of their life. I have a real issue with that. The other thing that I would bring up, and I'm done, I promise. And I think it was 2007 or 9, we brought in a gentleman from Louisiana to run the state retirement system. And things were going big time within the markets back then, okay? Everything was moving at lightning pace. Everything was good. They began to move into alternative equity investments, all right? Which were booming back then. Nobody predicted the housing market bust, all right? That literally put us into a 6-year spin nobody anticipated, which put the markets into a 6-year spin. So that's one of those things. It was a confluence of events. It was crooked people that were in bonding agencies like Standard & Poor's and others, bond rating agencies, all colluding together and stacking together mortgages at different levels into one big pot and going out and selling securities. It was a big problem. So is that Elizabeth's fault? Is that Jenny's fault? Is that the person who's been working for 30 years and maybe they're retired and they've been retired for 15? Is it their fault? I don't think so. So something I just think it's a process.
And we're not the only state with this problem. Most all of them.
Yeah, not every state.
Clearly, we're not going to change it on the folks that are already in the system, but yes, I definitely support defined contribution and not benefit.
I think
Quick
all
and
has
to
been
the point.
said.
Running for office, that's why I said trouble.
That's why she's my representative.
You gotta go.
She's unopposed because we think she does a good job.
Well, thanks for that bit of encouragement.
Yeah, I live in her district.
He doesn't live in your district, I know.
But I think we've had a pretty wide range of wide array of solutions, or partial solutions, or steps in the right direction. I think we're seeing that taking place now. We understand it is becoming the 600-pound elephant in the room. It needs to be dealt with, and the quicker the better. It's just going to take some time. The stock market crash back in 2007, 8, 9, whatever, really put a hamper on us all, and so it's been hard to climb back out of the hole. That's what we're trying to do, but they're looking at new avenues to do that. And I think it's refreshing. It's very innovative, and I appreciate their efforts.
Thanking all of you for answering the question. I've never had 5 members of the legislature talking to me before.
And was the best, wasn't it?
And this
was.
also makes us very thankful for our president, Donald J. Trump.
Amen.
Because our stocks went nicely, didn't they? Josiah?
Yes, ma'am. I just have a question for all of you. I am interested to know what you think about is the government mandated permitting system for carrying a weapon infringement on our rights to self-defense in the sense of the Second Amendment.
Okay, we're gonna ask everybody, and just quickly, so we can get everybo's opinion. I think you answered.
Would you like to answer for me?
No.
Most definitely. 3 simple words: shall not, be infringed. It is an infringement on our constitutional right to keep and bear arms, period.
Yes, I believe that's a form of infringement. To say that in order to concealed carry, you have to go and apply to SLED and ask for permission and pay a tax or a fee before you can carry for self-defense, I believe is a violation of the Second Amendment. I'd like to see that made optional. I also see the state infringing on the Second Amendment by saying you cannot carry openly a handgun. You can carry a rifle openly, but you can't carry a handgun, and we're one of only 5 states that that say that. We're on par with New York and Florida and a few others. So this question came up earlier, and I just will take the opportunity to point out that this is basically the bill that I filed, constitutional carry, is basically Vermont style carry. It basically takes South Carolina's laws and makes it like Vermont's. And Vermont has always allowed this from the beginning, from day one, as when they were created as a state. And I'll ask any of you here, I mean, when's the last time you heard of a school shooting or any kind of shooting for that matter in Vermont?
Well, I do have a CWP with that. But I also voted for constitutional carry, which was House 3930, which I think you voted for as well. I did vote against a tabling motion, not a bill that John, you pulled out under the motion period, tried to. Greg Delaney said no, and it was a tabling motion. So there's a lot of people out there misleading the truth about voting against his bill. His bill never came up for a vote. I don't even know if he asked for one to be heard in the committee meeting or not, because by Rule 4.6 of the House, any bill I receive as a chairman, or any other bill that comes in, once I'm in receipt of that bill for 20 days, if you are a sponsor, you write me a letter and say, I want a hearing on the bill. I have 7 legislative days to put it on the agenda. No exceptions. That's right. You must do it. I don't think it ever happened.
Is that a House rule rather than a Senate rule?
That is a House rule. So never happened. House Bill 3930 went through a committee process, which was open, or it was permitless carry, as well as constitutional carry, whichever one you would call it, was voted on in the General Assembly. I think most all of us up here voted for it.
Yep.
Went to the Senate, where it refused to get a hearing. So I think that it went to their Judiciary Committee, which is a little bit different than our Judiciary Committee, because Greg Delaney is a very big Second Amendment man. So we have it on that part. But, you know, I do have a CWP because I want to go to other states and carry my weapon. I worked hard personally to get reciprocity with North Carolina, personally. We all had to file a bill to get reciprocity with Georgia. So we can carry within South Carolina underneath this law, but to carry it across state lines, another state doesn't have it. Now we're telling our citizens, well, you can carry in our state, but then you go somewhere else, you're going to get arrested. You know, I think if you're going to do constitutional carry, then it should be done at the federal level, where the U.S. Constitution gives you the Second Amendment right. That should be looked at where all states do it, not where you got a patchwork where you're going to make criminals out of law-abiding citizens walking around with a gun that they may or may not have. So, yes, that is where I am on it.
Okay, thank you.
That's my CWP, just in case you want to look at it. I just wanted to see when it expired. I was getting nervous.
Mine expired in 2020. I pulled out an update with somebody. Here's mine.
Mine's 19. I do believe in the Second Amendment, and I do believe there's a process to get there. I think one of the things that bothers me more than anything right now is that there's disinformation and misinformation out there. There were two bills in the House of Representatives, 3700 and 3930. There were two different bills. I have a history of making sure you have an opportunity to put your input in to any legislation in Columbia. I do not like calling a bill out of committee without it going through the committee process. You see, when it's in a committee, did you request a hearing on it at all?
My bill did receive a hearing in the 2015-2016 session.
But I'm talking about when we pulled it out of committee that year. I mean,
not 2017.
You didn't request a hearing. Okay.
I did request a hearing. I'm not granted.
Okay, but this is what's going on out there right now. I mean, I'm getting calls all the time saying, you voted against constitutional carry. No, I didn't. I voted for 3930. I voted for tabling, and I told you, we're desk mates. I mean, you know that. I voted for tabling it. And that's because I don't like bills coming straight from committee back to the floor without public hearings. You don't disengage the public of our state just to pull it back out of committee. And I can prove that because I voted against the autism bill for the same reason. And let me tell you what happened with the autism. Maybe you remember this one. They allowed it to come out of committee, all right, without a hearing. Do you know what the amendment was they put on it? 32 pages. 32. That's what happens when you don't go through the process. So, I mean, no offense to Jonathan, but I'm not going to vote to pull any bill out of committee unless the chairman agrees with it and there's a consensus of the standing committee. I'm not going to do it for any other reason. That's the problem we're in as a party right now, guys. We've got to quit the disinformation stuff. And you've had some too. I mean, I'm telling you, I mean, it's not right. So that's my truth, the way I see it and the way I run it out.
I think the answer to the question is yes. I do agree that probably our permitting, and I think that's what they're saying too. They're just explaining why they didn't vote for the constitutional carry. And I agree. I did vote with it, but in their defense, I never ever usually vote for anything that you pull from a committee to the floor, and so I think that was probably the right move on y'all's part. I, on the other hand, knew we would get our lunch eaten for not doing that.
But we knew the other bill was coming at the same time.
And so I do think that was probably the right vote there. But yes, I do. Your question was, do I think that impedes on our right to carry? And yes, I do.
Yeah, and to answer the question directly, yes, I think for a law-abiding citizen, it does infringe on their right because they do have a right, according to the Second Amendment, to bear arms. It's those folks that break our laws and don't follow things, that they're the ones that should be denied it anyway. Just have to make sure we keep them out of their hands. But they do have a right, law-abiding citizens do have a right to do it. I was a co-sponsor on
30, I think
30.
we all were. You were
And,
37. Oh, 37.
3,700. And, but I don't have a problem with that. I think the main thing is to make sure we enforce the laws we do have on the books. And, but it is an infringement, I do agree with you. And we do have a right to bear and keep arms.
I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Mr. Fremantle for putting himself out there to run against an incumbent. I really appreciate anyone who wants to run for office. So I want to thank him so much for that. And I want to give a big hand to the representatives we have that have been serving. And I just ask y'all to give them a round of applause real quick. I'm sure they'll hang around for a few minutes, but we wanted to go ahead and close it up. And I appreciate all of y'all coming out here. And we've had, I think, 3 Mondays in a row, and y'all been great to do that. So without any further ado, we usually call for adjournment.
Approved motion to adjourn, Madam Chair.
You're adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, I see all of